Marcos. It has been 16 years since President Marcos came to the United States on an official visit, and 16 years since we first welcomed him to our podium at the National Press Club. When he appeared before us then, he had just been elected president of the former American colony, which became an independent nation in 1946. We knew Marcos was a war hero. He got so many medals in World War II that when the young Major Marcos met four-star General Omar Bradley, the general saluted him. We also knew he was a persuasive fellow. How else could he have managed to get his wife, who is known to be strong and bright, to marry him after they'd known each other for only 11 days? And we knew he was experienced in overcoming political adversity. After all, the first case Mr. Marcos ever won as a lawyer was when he successfully defended himself from prison against a charge of murdering a political opponent of his father. The president of the press club at that time, Win Booth, remarked at the great warmth of the greeting Mr. Marcos received in 1966 and said, and I quote, "Your very presence reminds us that you and your great people are the faithful allies of our country in time of trouble. And that, sir, is something the American people and the men and women assembled in this room are not about to forget," end quote. But much has happened in those 16 years. In the interim, Mr. Marcos declared martial law, or what he called constitutional authoritarianism, and did not lift it for 11 years. There have been charges of corruption, abuses of human rights, and political repression, and recently the Archbishop of Manila called openly for him to resign. But through it all, Mr. Marcos has remained president, and this week, President Reagan warmly welcomed him, stressing the many common ties between the two countries. The New York Times recently said, quote, "In a country that is deeply sensitive to style, Ferdinand Marcos has it, and it has allowed him to take the sweeping actions that in essence converted the nation from an ill-functioning, raucous but free democracy into his personal fief and seemingly permanent possession," end quote. President Marcos comes to us today as the head of a nation with a long friendship with the United States, a nation considered crucial to America's defense strategies in Asia. We are eager to hear what Mr. Marcos has to say. It's my pleasure to present to you Ferdinand Marcos, President of the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Madam President, distinguished guests, my friends. It certainly is gratifying that in the course of my present visit to the United States, I should once again be accorded the opportunity to meet with the people who understand me or misunderstand me most. I'd like to thank all of you. I remember that our relationship the relationship between the two countries can be opened up at one of 2 points by the historian or the curious investigator into world events. One, the military, which was Admiral or then Commodore Dewey sinking the Spanish fleet under Montojo on May 1st, 1898 in Manila Bay, and with the help of the Filipino revolutionaries under General or President Emilio Aguinaldo, who then proclaimed the first Philippine Republic. Incidentally, President Emilio Aguinaldo was the grandfather of Prime Minister Cesar Virata, who's here. My grandfather only commanded the revolutionary forces. We have changed places since then. Either that point of entry is chosen or the more sedate commercial one 100 years back. 1796, the brig Astrea, sailing out of Salem, Massachusetts, towards Lisbon, and then to Manila, selling her wares there for 5 months, carrying that amateur and self-taught mathematician and navigator, Nathaniel Blow Ditz, whom you must have heard, who later, in 1806, authored The Practical American Navigator, for he had discovered the simple way of determining longitude through the long voyage across the Pacific. The American government bought the rights after 2 editions, and it has become standard text for all those who study salesmanship from Kings Point to Annapolis. Either way, it has been dramatic and historic, and it was always to be so. There was always extreme on both sides, enmity, if not enmity, extreme friendship, a relationship of love, hate, and this is my fate and destiny. I thank you all for this privilege and this honor. It may be said that an official journal like mine ought always to visit with this press association, for as someone once observed correctly, the American press is of course the 4th branch of government in this country, and then also it is well to remember that the so-called solicitude with which Americans regard developments in the Philippines is perhaps nowhere more pronounced than in the devoted reportage by the American press on our country. This keen of the American interest of the American press notwithstanding, there is, I fear, some confusion in this country of what is happening in the Philippines today. It has been one of the shocks I encountered while preparing for my present journey, and also upon arrival here in Washington, to read in one of your outstanding papers a statement to the effect that the Philippines is still under military rule, which it is not, and that there is no civil government. Such misstatements, whether intended or otherwise, conveniently merge with more accurate reporting about the true situation in the country, resulting in much confusion and misimpressions about our country, require clarification. So perhaps I should begin by stating first a few basic facts about our country without too much embroidery. The Philippines is a republican state with a duly elected government at national and community level. We have a national constitution, duly drafted by a constitutional convention, elected and convened in 1970, and duly ratified by our people in 1973. Under that constitution, ours is a modified form of presidential government with a National Assembly constituted by assemblymen elected by regions in 1978, and a president directly elected by the people in 1981. Legislative power is vested in that National Assembly, while the executive power is vested in the president. And the party in power, the party that won the most number of members in this National Assembly, choose the leader of the legislature, and the leader is the Prime Minister, and is no other than Prime Minister Cesar Virata. We have an independent judiciary which is under the full supervision of the Supreme Court. While it is claimed that human rights are not protected by the courts, or that civil rights are not duly enhanced by the Constitution, because there is no way of seeking, say, the remedy of a writ of habeas corpus. The truth of the matter is anyone can petition for a writ of habeas corpus in the Philippines. In fact, all those who have been apprehended as having brought in hundreds and hundreds of firearms bought from the PLO and other sources, and who have bragged openly in the television when they are caught that they were the leaders of these rebel groups, and who later changed their tone on the advice of their lawyers, went to the Supreme Court and were able to obtain an order from the Supreme Court for the Philippine government to bring the bodies of these people before the Supreme Court, which we did. There is not a single man who has filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus who has not been able to compel the government to bring the body of all those petitioners to the Supreme Court. In fact, the Supreme Court ordered an investigation on the allegations of torture, and the results were negative. The doctors testified that they examined all of these persons, all these petitioners, during the period of confinement, and they never complained about any mistreatment or torture, and some indiscreet remark indicated that this was merely said on the advice of the lawyer as a preparation for defense in the criminal trial. Now let's review the overall measures. All measures that have been issued by the President were issued at his instance alone? No. They are issued after a meeting of what is known as the party caucus. You who have studied constitutional law know that in a modified parliamentary or presidential form of government, the President actually doesn't make the decisions. He may lead the party, and therefore in the caucus he may exert influence in the caucus, but the caucus decides what is going to happen. What is the policy to be adopted? In fact, our Constitution institutionalizes this procedure and states that the program and policy of government shall be adopted by the cabinet, submitted to the President for approval, but shall be responsible to the members of the National Assembly or the Batasang Pambansa, and for which the Prime Minister must stand. If he is rejected, then he must quit, he must resign, and a new Prime Minister must be appointed. Now, all cases are appealable to the Supreme Court, including cases of security against the state. We have a system of local government and administration throughout the country. In all, there are 73 provinces, 60 cities, 1,502 municipalities, 42,000 barangays, in each of which there are regular elections. Barangays are the villages. We just had elections this year. The election for president occurred in 1981. Under the Constitution, the people have a right of recall. They can recall anyone who has been elected by 1/5 of all the voters who voted in the last elections. A vote of 1/5 will suffice to call a new election for any given post. Our Constitution likewise provides for a Bill of Rights, which guarantees protection of the political and civil rights of all individuals, regardless of color or creed. Incidentally, that statement allegedly made by Cardinal Sin has been denied by Cardinal Sin. I was surprised that you haven't heard about it. This just goes to prove that there is some time lag when you move towards the West. Cardinal Sin, when he arrived in the Philippines, appeared before some of our friends and said, look, there is no quarrel between the church and state, and the church and state are separate. I have no intention of intervening in political affairs. I have not stated that the president should resign. That's his business. That's the business of the people. He was elected by the people, and I'm not about to say anything about this. That's why I'm surprised that here you make much of it. But I suppose that's part of news. It's good copy. Can you imagine asking the president to resign? That's by constitutional mandate. Social justice is a matter of national policy and a priority objective of government. And this is why one of the first reforms was land reform. You know, when I proclaimed martial law, I didn't proclaim martial law alone. It is made to appear as if I just signed the decree and said, I impose martial law on each and every one of you. No. I asked the legislature to please pass a law proclaiming martial law because there was anarchy in the country. Now, let me say this. The opposition was strong. And they were members of the Security Council, and somehow they adopted a resolution which required that there be a unanimous vote for the armed forces to be able to move. And therefore, the armed forces was immobilized. At the same time, I asked the opposition party to come and join me in a coalition government. I offered one half of the cabinet. And of course, they laughed at me and said, why should we join you? We're going to take over the government. By the time you're through with the exercise, you're dead, politically and otherwise. So, and they refused to join me. I asked the advice of the judiciary. I asked the Supreme Court justices, the Court of Appeals justices, and the members of the private sector. And all of them told me, there's only one man who can proclaim martial law, and that is the president. And you are it. You are the only one who can proclaim martial law. This is why I must carry this particular mark in our history. I could not have transferred it to the legislature. Why? Because the legislature did not have the power. What does the Constitution provide? The President shall be the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and he may order the armed forces out to quell any disorder, riot, rebellion, invasion, insurrection, and in case of invasion, insurrection, rebellion, or imminent danger thereof, when the public safety requires it, he may suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus or proclaim martial law throughout the Philippines or any part thereof. What does that provision provide? It provides that only the President can proclaim martial law. I repeat, that is why I had to assume responsibility. And I am not one for shirking duty. The people said there was necessity for proclaiming martial law. And the people said, you are the only official who can proclaim martial law. So I proclaimed martial law. And I sincerely believed that it was necessary to proclaim martial law to install order and stability because there was complete anarchy throughout the country at the time. Now, therefore, at that particular period, what was the status of our government? Our government was immobilized, impotent. The armed forces could not move out. The industry was not at all in any way moving. It was